She retired and signed it over, what my nephew told the whole family until the deed and my license voided him at the Centennial Open House. The gilt-edged card is still warm from the printer when Chad presses it into my hand, grinning, and says loud enough for the whole viewing room to hear, "Aunt Dottie, you don't have to worry about the paperwork anymore. You retired and signed it all over to me. Sit down before you tire yourself out." The lilies on the register stand are too sweet, that funeral parlor sweetness that gets into the back of your throat, and under it, the sharp bite of the formaldehyde that never fully leaves the walls of a place like ours. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rings twice and stops. My sister-in-law, Renata, is nodding along, patting my arm like I'm a woman who forgets where she put her glasses. Chad has printed his own name under the crest my father hung in 1974. Director, Klein Family Funeral Home. And he has printed it in a font that costs nothing and means nothing. The card says I gave him 51 years of my life. I did not. He thinks the old woman in the sensible shoes is finished. He has no idea what I keep in my mother's jewelry box, or whose name is on the 2 pieces of paper that make everything he just said a lie. Let me take you back to the beginning, because a thing like this doesn't happen in one afternoon. It's built, board by board, over a life. I was born Dorothea Ann Klein in 1951 in a rented duplex on Broadway Road in Mesa, when Mesa was still citrus groves and dust and Sunday quiet. My father, Harold Klein, drove a hearse for another man's mortuary for 11 years before he scraped together the down payment on a shuttered furniture store on Main Street and turned it into Klein Family Funeral Home. He did it on $4,200 borrowed from a Mormon rancher named Elias Pratt, who never once asked for interest, only that Harold do right by the dead. I was 14. I swept the prep room floor after school for $1 a week, and I learned early that the dead don't lie to you and don't leave. It's the living you watch. My mother, Lorena, kept the books at the kitchen table with a green ledger and a mechanical pencil, and she kept her whole self in a walnut jewelry box my father gave her the year I was born. It wasn't fine. Woolworth's veneer, a little brass hook that stuck, a red felt lining gone bald in the corners, and a music movement in the base that played 8 tinny notes of Beautiful Dreamer if you lifted the lid slow. Inside, her wedding band when the arthritis got too bad to wear it, a mercury dime, my baby bracelet, and the folded receipts of a family that never once threw away proof of anything. When she was dying in 1998, she pressed that box into my 2 hands and said, "You're the one who watches, Dottie. Keep what matters where you can find it." I didn't fully understand her yet. I would. Here's the thing nobody in my family ever bothered to learn about me. In 1979, at 28, I sat for the Arizona Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers, and I passed both the National Board exam and the State Law exam, and I have held an active, unbroken Funeral Directors and Embalmers license, number 4471, for 47 years. Not my father, not my late brother Wendell, me. And in 1986, when my father's heart started skipping and the bank wanted a name on the refinance that could actually run the business, he deeded the property, the building at 218 South McDonald, all 6,400 square feet of it, and the 2 lots behind it, to me, Dorothea A. Klein, sole owner of record. He did it at a lawyer's office over on University with a man named Delbert Marsh, and afterward, he took me to the Big Apple Diner and bought me a patty melt and said, "Now it's real. Now nobody can take it out from under you." I was 35. I have never told the family, because in our family, the men held the titles and the women held the family together, and it was easier to let them believe the story they liked. I ran that funeral home for 39 years. I embalmed. I met the ambulance at 3 a.m. I sat with widowers who had nobody. I buried 9,000 people, give or take, and I never once got the name wrong on a headstone. My father died in 2001, my brother Wendell in 2009, And by then the sign said the same thing, but the hands doing the work were mine and Gus's. Gus Petrakis came to me in 1994, a barrel-chested Greek kid with a trade school certificate and hands steadier than any surgeon's. He'd been let go from a chain mortuary in Tempe for refusing to upsell a $9,000 mahogany casket to a family that had $900. That told me everything I needed to know about him. I hired him at $11 an hour and a handshake, and 32 years later, Gus is the only man alive who has stood beside me at the prep table through every hard case this town could send us. The SIDS babies, the highway wrecks, the ones the desert kept too long before somebody found them. Gus doesn't talk much. When he does, it's true. Chad is my brother Wendell's son. He came into my life as a soft-cheeked boy of 6 at Wendell's second wedding in 1992, and for a long while I loved him the uncomplicated way you love your only nephew. I taught him to drive the flower van when he was 17. I paid for 2 semesters at Mesa Community College before he dropped out. I put $1,800 into his first car, a wheezing Pontiac Grand Am, and I never asked for a dime back. The good years were real. I want to be honest about that, because it's the good years that make the rest cut so deep. There was a Christmas, 2004 maybe, when Chad sat on the prep room stool eating my divinity fudge and asked me, dead serious, whether the dead were lonely. And I told him no, that's what we're for. And he nodded like I'd handed him something to keep. I thought I was raising a man who understood the work. I was raising a man who understood the address. The first wrong note came in the fall of 2019. Chad, 33 by then, twice divorced and freshly fired from a solar panel outfit in Gilbert, asked if he could learn the business. I was 68 and my knees had opinions about the stairs, so I said yes with an open heart. I started him at $19 an hour on the removal van and the front of house work, greeting families, running the register book, handling the flowers. And here is the first scene I filed away, the way my mother taught me to file things. November 2019. A widow named Mrs. Alvarado came in to arrange her husband's service on a fixed income, Social Security, and not much else. I was in the back finishing a cosmetic case when I heard Chad through the wall walking her up the price sheet, from the $2,395 direct package to a $7,600 memorial tribute selection with a bronze urn she'd be paying off for 2 years. I came out drying my hands and cut it clean back down to what she could bear, and I gave her the extra register book for free. In the parking lot afterward, Chad said, "Aunt Dottie, you leave money on the table every single day. That's not business, that's charity." I looked at him a long moment. "It's the business your grandfather built," I said. He smiled like I was quaint. I filed it. The second note, spring 2021. I noticed the coupon book donations to the Mesa Public Schools Fund had stopped, a $250 a year thing my father started in 1977. And when I asked the bookkeeper, she said Chad had told her I'd decided to trim the fat. I hadn't decided anything. I put it back and said nothing to him, and I started reading the QuickBooks entries myself every Sunday night at the kitchen table, under the same lamp my mother used, with the jewelry box sitting by my elbow where I keep it. That's when the little brass hook that always stuck came loose in my fingers one night, and I thought, not for the first time, that some things hold shut right up until they don't. The third note was the one that stopped being a note and started being a warning. February 2023. Chad had gotten friendly with a funeral home acquisition consultant, a slick outfit called Meridian Legacy Partners that buys up independent parlors, keeps the family name on the sign for goodwill, and runs everything else out of a call center in Dallas. I found their offer letter in the office printer tray. $1.4 million for Klein Family Funeral Home, pending clear title. Chad had written back on our letterhead, our letterhead, saying he anticipated having authority to execute by year's end. He'd signed it Chad Klein, Managing Director. He had appointed himself. He had also, I would later learn, told the Meridian people that his elderly aunt was in cognitive decline and that the ownership was a family formality about to be cleaned up. I didn't confront him. I want you to understand that this was not weakness. My mother didn't slam the lid on the jewelry box. She lowered it slow and let the music play out. I watched, and I got very, very quiet, and I called a man I trusted. But first, the offense had to finish itself, and it did in June of 2025. Here is what Chad actually did. He knew there was a transfer somewhere. He'd heard the family talk about Grandpa signing it over back in the 80s, and he assumed, the way lazy men assume, that it had gone to his father Wendell and then down to him. So he had a document drawn up, a confirmation of transfer and assignment of interest, notarized, that stated Dorothea A. Klein hereby retires from and conveys all right, title, and interest in Klein Family Funeral Home to Chad Klein. And then he forged my signature. He'd had 30 years of birthday cards to practice from. He took a real thing, my slow looping D and the way I cross my final E, and he copied it onto a lie. Then he told the family I'd done it willingly. I found out the way you find out about a betrayal, sideways, from someone kind. My cousin Delphine called me on a Tuesday, worried, and said, "Dottie, I think it's wonderful you're finally resting. Chad said you signed everything over to him back in the spring and you're just going to enjoy your retirement." I was standing at the prep room sink with my gloves still on. I could hear the compressor of the walk-in cooler humming behind me, that steady low note it's made for 20 years. I set the phone on speaker on the steel table, and I peeled my gloves off one finger at a time. "When did I do that, Delphine?" I asked. "April," he said. "He's got the papers, notarized and everything." Gus was across the table from me, mid-suture on a gentleman from Sunland, and he stopped and looked up, and I watched his face understand it a half second before I let myself. There was no explosion in me. I want to tell you there was, because rage would be cleaner. What there was instead was a click, small and final, like the brass hook on my mother's box finding its catch. 47 years of holding a license I'd earned, 39 years holding a deed with my name on it, and my brother's boy had decided I was a formality to be cleaned up. "Gus," I said, "finish Mr. Ortega. Then I need you to be very normal for a few weeks. Can you do that?" Gus set down his needle. "Whatever it is," he said, "I'm in it with you." That night, I called Delbert Marsh's son. Old Delbert had died in 2015, but his boy, Aaron Marsh, had taken over the practice on university, and Aaron Marsh still had his father's files, including, in a fireproof cabinet, the original 1986 warranty deed recorded with Maricopa County, conveying 218 South McDonald to Dorothea A. Klein in fee simple. I know it was there because I'd sent a copy to be held there myself years back when my mother told me to keep what matters where I could find it. "Aaron," I said, "it's Dorothea Klein. I need to come see you, and I need you to pull 2 things, my deed, and I want a certified copy of my funeral director's license history from the state board, 47 years, unbroken." There was a pause, papers moving. "Ms. Klein," he said, "is somebody trying to take your building?" "My nephew already thinks he has," I said. "I'd like to let him keep thinking it a little longer." I heard him almost laugh and then think better of it. "Come Thursday," he said, "bring anything with the forged signature on it." The machine started turning. Now, the quiet part. This is the part Chad never saw, because a man who forges a signature assumes everyone else is as sloppy as he is. Over the next 9 weeks, I did not raise my voice, cancel a single arrangement, or miss a Rotary breakfast. I let Chad play director. I even let him order new business cards. What I did instead was assemble. Aaron Marsh pulled the 1986 warranty deed and confirmed with the Maricopa County recorder the title had never once transferred out of my name. No reconveyance, no lien, no sale, nothing. In plain terms, I owned the ground and the building free and clear, and I had for 39 years. He pulled my license record from the Arizona State Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers, license 4471, active, in good standing, 0 disciplinary actions since 1979. And here is the piece Chad never even thought about. In Arizona, a funeral establishment cannot legally operate without a licensed funeral director of record on file with the board. That director of record for Klein Family Funeral Home had been me for 47 years. Chad had never sat for a single exam. Chad could no more run a funeral home than fly the hearse. So his forged transfer had 2 fatal holes, and Aaron laid them out for me plain, so I'd have it clean in my head before the day came. First, you can't convey what you don't have. Chad's paper claims to move ownership from you to him, but you never signed it, and even if a signature looked real, the underlying deed is yours and only yours to move. Second, even if he owned the walls, he cannot lawfully operate a funeral establishment in this state because the license of record is yours. The transfer is void 2 ways. It's not a lawsuit, Ms. Klein. It's a fact. You just have to show it. Then Aaron did the careful work. He obtained the forged confirmation of transfer. The family had passed copies around like party favors, so it wasn't hard. He had my genuine signature exemplars compared by a documents examiner named Priya Venkataraman out of Phoenix, $1,750, who wrote a 4-page report finding the questioned signature a simulated forgery produced by a second hand. He confirmed the notary, a woman at a mailbox store in Apache Junction, had stamped it without me present, which is its own crime. And he quietly notified Meridian Legacy Partners Counsel that the clear title they'd been promised did not and would never exist, and that any purchase agreement signed by Chad Klein was worth exactly the paper it soiled. Meridian withdrew in 11 days. That $1.4 million Chad thought he was steering into his own pocket evaporated, and he didn't even know it yet. I paid for all of it out of the operating account I'd built to $214,000 over 4 decades of leaving money on the table. The account Chad called charity. Charity, it turns out, is also a war chest. There was one more piece, and it was Gus's. Without my asking, Gus had started keeping a small spiral notebook in his apron. Dates and times Chad had told a family member or a vendor that I'd retired. June 3rd, told the flower wholesaler. June 19th, told cousin Delphine. July 2nd, told the monument company to bill him directly going forward. 22 entries in Gus's blocky pencil print. In case you ever needed to show it wasn't one bad day, he said, and slid the notebook across the steel table to me. I have never in my life wanted to hug a man in rubber gloves so badly. I kept that notebook in my mother's jewelry box, on top of the certified deed, under the lid that plays 8 notes of Beautiful Dreamer. And every Sunday I lowered that lid slow and let it finish. Chad, meanwhile, planned a party. He wanted to announce his ownership to the whole town at once, and he'd found the perfect stage. 2025 was the funeral home's centennial, 100 years since Harold Klein first opened the doors in 1925 in the old furniture store on Main before we moved to McDonald. Chad scheduled a centennial open house for Saturday, August 16th. He printed 300 of those gilt-edged invitations. He hired a caterer, ordered a sheet cake from Basha's with the Klein crust and frosting, and invited the mayor's aide, the Chamber of Commerce, the pastor from First Presbyterian, 40 relatives, and a photographer from the East Valley Tribune. He was going to stand under my father's 1974 crest and be crowned. I let him. I paid the caterer's deposit myself, $900, and told him it was my centennial gift. He thanked me. He actually thanked me. Aaron asked if I was sure I wanted to do it in front of everyone. "We could handle this in an office," he said, quietly. "No," I said. He told the whole family I retired and signed it over. He said it to my cousins, my pastor, my father's memory. He'll hear the truth in the same room he told the lie. That was the only vengeance I let myself want. The same room. Which brings us back to the gilt-edged card, still warm from the printer, in my hand. The viewing room was full. Renata was patting my arm. The lilies were too sweet. Chad had just told 100 people to sit me down before I tired myself out, and 100 people had chuckled, the fond way you laugh at an old woman being managed by a capable young man. The photographer raised his camera. Chad stepped up beside the register stand under Harold Klein's crest, tapped a butter knife against a glass of sparkling cider, and began the speech he'd clearly practiced in a mirror. 100 years, he said, 100 years of the Klein family serving Mesa, and it's my honor, my privilege, to carry that legacy forward as your new director. My Aunt Dorothea gave this business her whole life, and this spring she made the decision to retire and pass the torch to me. Aunt Dottie, would you stand up and let everyone thank you? Applause started. I stood, but I did not thank anyone. I lifted my mother's walnut jewelry box. I'd carried it in on my arm like a purse, and not one person had thought twice about the old woman and her keepsake. And I set it on the register stand next to Chad's cider, and I raised the lid slow. 8 tinny notes of Beautiful Dreamer drifted out over the quieting room. Chad's smile flickered. He didn't know what the music meant, only that it was strange. "Chad, honey," I said, and my voice carried farther than his had, because I've spoken over grief for 47 years, and I know how to fill a room without shouting. "You told these good people I retired and signed it over to you in April. I want to make sure everybody hears me clearly, because I'd hate for there to be any confusion. I never signed anything over to you. I couldn't have. There's nothing of mine that was ever yours to be given." I lifted the first paper from the box. "This is the warranty deed to 218 South McDonald. This building, these 2 lots, recorded with Maricopa County on the 4th of March, 1986. It conveys everything here to one person, Dorothea Ann Klein, me. It has never moved, not once in 39 years, not to your father, not to you." I held it up so the photographer's flash caught it. "I own the ground you're standing on, son." The room had gone very still. Renata's hand had come off my arm. I lifted the second paper. "This is my license. Arizona Funeral Director and Embalmer, number 4471, held without a break since 1979, 47 years. In this state, no funeral home can open its doors without a licensed director of record. That's been me since before you were born. You never sat the exam. You couldn't run this place for 1 legal hour without me, Chad. Not one." His face did the thing I'd seen 1,000 times on the newly bereaved, the blood simply leaving it, from the forehead down, until a person goes the gray-white of a candle. The butter knife was still in his hand. He set it down very carefully, the way you set something down when your fingers have stopped obeying you. "Aunt Dottie," he started, there's a signed transfer. I have it. It's notarized." "You mean this one?" I lifted the third paper, the confirmation of transfer with my name forged on the bottom. I had it examined by a document specialist in Phoenix, Ms. Venkataraman. Her report's right here, and she found the signature was made by a second hand. Yours, I'd guess, but she was too professional to guess. The notary in Apache Junction stamped it without me in the room, which is a felony all by itself. Meridian Legacy Partners already knows the title was never clean. They pulled their offer 11 days ago. There's no $1.4 million coming, Chad. There never was. Somebody in the back of the room, I think it was old Elias Pratt's grandson, said low, "My God." Aaron Marsh stepped forward from where he'd been standing quietly by the flower cross in his gray suit and set his card on the register stand next to the jewelry box. "For anyone who has questions about what's valid," he said, mild as milk, "I'm Ms. Klein's attorney. The short version is this: the deed is hers, the license is hers, and the transfer is void 2 separate ways. It never had legal life. Chad looked around the room for a friendly face and found 40 relatives looking at him the way you look at a man who has been telling you a story you now understand was a con. Renata had both hands pressed to her mouth. The pastor from First Presbyterian was studying the carpet. The photographer, God bless him, had lowered his camera because even he knew this wasn't a picture anybody would want printed. "You told them I was in decline," I said, and this was the only moment my voice dropped low and hard. "You told the Dallas people your aunt's mind was going, so you could sell the house my father borrowed $4,200 to build. You told Delphine I was resting. You told the monument company to bill you. Gus wrote down the dates, 22 of them, every time you said I'd retired. I have that too." I closed the lid of the jewelry box, slow, and the last note of Beautiful Dreamer hung and died in the sweet lily air. I don't watch the dead, Chad. They don't need it. I watch the living. Your grandmother taught me that, in this room. He didn't beg well. Cowards never do. He said my name twice more, and then he said, "This is a misunderstanding," to a room that understood perfectly, and then he walked out through the double doors he'd propped open for his own celebration, past the Basha's sheet cake with the Klein crest in frosting, past 300 gilt-edged invitations fanned on the guest table, and the little brass bell over the door, the one my father hung in 1974, rang once behind him and went quiet. Nobody followed him. The Chamber of Commerce still gave a toast that afternoon, but it was to 100 years and to me, and the mayor's aide shook my hand, and the East Valley Tribune ran a photo the next Thursday of the actual director of Klein Family Funeral Home standing under her father's crest, an old woman in sensible shoes, not tired at all. The county attorney's office declined to prosecute Chad in the end. A first offense forgery of a family document, no money actually lost, the victim herself asking for leniency. I did ask for leniency, and I'll tell you why. And it isn't softness. It's that I already had everything. He had nothing. Sending him to Florence wouldn't have given me back one day, and my mother didn't teach me to slam lids. He signed a notarized statement admitting the transfer was fraudulent. Aaron made sure of that, and he agreed never to use the Klein name in business again. He moved to Bullhead City. He sells timeshares now, I hear. The last thing of ours he ever touched was that cider glass, and Gus washed it and put it back in the cupboard without a word. Here is where the story ends, and it ends warm. It's a Sunday in October now, past the worst of the heat, and the swamp cooler on the roof is ticking the way it does when the day finally cools. A mundane, ordinary sound I've heard 10,000 Sundays. Gus and I are in the office at the back of Klein Family Funeral Home, the office that has been mine on paper since 1986, and mine in truth since I was 14 with a broom. I gave Gus something last month, 20% of the business, drawn up proper by Aaron, with a director's title and a raise to match, because a man who keeps a notebook for you in his apron without being asked should own a piece of the thing he protected. He cried when I told him, this barrel-chested Greek who doesn't talk much, and then he said, "Your father would have done this 30 years ago." And I said, "My father wasn't as smart as me," and Gus laughed until the walk-in compressor seemed to laugh with him. We're teaching a new apprentice, a serious girl named Marisol, who reminds me of me. She asked last week whether the dead get lonely, and I told her no, that's what we're for, and she wrote it down. She'll sit for license 4471's successor one day. The name over the door still says Klein, and it will, because I earned it and no one ever took it, no matter what they told the family, for one long summer. My mother's jewelry box came home from that open house with the deed and the license and Gus's little pencil notebook inside it. And the brass hook still sticks, and it still plays 8 notes of Beautiful Dreamer if you lift the lid slow. I carry it back into the office now, past the register stand, past my father's crest, and I set my mother's jewelry box down on the desk of the funeral home that's mine.